You are about to receive messages that may be harmful to your mental state. Your sense of reality will be questioned. Your view on things will be altered. You are now part of the Meta. The Meta controls everything. The Meta determines what will and will not happen. You are watching The Meta Show.
Ah! Hold on. Did it work? Yes!
We're live.
We're live! It worked! Haha! I fixed it! I think.
I see moderator has, there we go.
Yeah, there we go. Got it. I got it. We're good. We got it. I just had to
That's
move
kind of
things
weird.
around.
So on the screen that I see, it's something totally different because Skype is being weird and Boat's thing has frozen on my view. But on the stream itself, I can actually see moderator's partially smiling face.
I can fix this, Mittens. Hang on.
There we go. We're good. No, we're good.
Well, I fixed it for you. There we go. Sharing screens again. We're good. We're ready to go.
Okay.
Got it.
Chaos. Well, I want to welcome everybody to this week's Meta Show. We have an interesting time. We have both Jintan and Moderator. We're going to be introducing them in a few moments. We're going to be having a special this week about the CSM elections. This is the only opportunity we have for a special CSM episode because this is the only CSM election in history that has only lasted for a week.
Yeah, what?
Most of the time the CSM elections last for several weeks, but this time around, nope.
It was kind of like, oops, we forgot to send that out 3 weeks ago, so you guys got a week. Go.
Yeah, pretty much. So let's go ahead and get stuck in. Let's start with the moderator. You get to introduce yourself first. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You got the camera. Jintan tried to actually get on screen, and Skype was just not agreeing with him. He tells us that he has a very attractive suit. But moderator, why don't you tell us a little about yourself first?
Well, I don't have an attractive blink suit like Jintan does, but I'm snuffed out in low security space in the Imperium as of a few months ago. Snuff joined. I'm running for CSM 13 this time around. I haven't ever ran before, so this is a new experience for me. Probably I'm best known for the Alliance tournament commentary I've done over the last couple of years, being on the Vegas stream and having been on the strategic focus group, and that was a thing.
That's right. It was Alliance Tournament talk. That's what I wanted to bring you on for. I am a dumb. I swear.
I want to give shout-outs here to Ralos, suggesting with his resub message that everybody exercises their freedom within the Imperium to vote exactly the way that the state tells you.
Well, it's like elections in North Korea, right? They get everyone gets to freely choose who to vote for. It just happens to be there's only one person on the ballot. In this case, the ballot's handed to you, and you just put it in the machine, and you freely voted.
Exactly. And I believe that we have both Brisk, Rubal, and Moderator. You are on the official Imperium ballot, correct?
Yes, I am 6 on that list.
Sweet.
Yay!
I also managed to squeak my way onto the ballot, and thank you for that.
Welcome. Well, here we are helping out everyone. It's hard to say with the down ballot stuff how much the single transferable vote stuff will kick in, because that was put in by CCP originally to try to prevent nullsec entities from doing what we had previously done, which is just winning the entire CSM elections through the force of democracy. So they tried to restrict democracy by implementing the single transferable vote because they were afraid of free and fair elections.
What is a democracy? Because I believe we are a republic, and we are a democratic republic. We are not a democracy. I don't know what is this democracy you speak of?
Well, I don't know who's the we. Are we talking about the United States? Because not everybody who's watching this is from the U.S. Let's hand this over to Jintan. Jintan, you haven't gotten a chance to introduce yourself before we start making a bunch of democracy and republic jokes. Jintan, who are you, and why should we care?
Yeah, I'm the member. I'm our local constitutional monarchy resident, technically, although we are a parliamentary democracy here in the United Kingdom, supposedly. And I used to be part of CVA, since moved to TESS, spent some time there, was really lovely, but now I'm striking off and trying to do a bit of my own thing.
Now, rumor has it that you're what's the name of your new entity?
We've been bandying about a few names, but Dran really wanted to call us the Neutral States just to fuck with the person who does the soft maps on, the big ones. And I kind of liked that, so we haven't decided, yeah, basically.
So it's not an entity called Red Noise?
No, Red Noise is just my alliance.
Red Notice is your
yeah, it's his alliance,
okay,
but he's trying to make a coalition called the Neutral States, because whenever that guy makes the map, the Neutral States, he tends to just throw people he doesn't know in there. And so by Jintan doing that, it's going to fuck with his map. He's got to redo the whole thing.
It actually, just a few minutes ago, the New Eden Report published an article suggesting that you guys are going to be going for Immancy. Do you have anything to say about that?
I think it would be wise to not comment on potential future endeavors for fear of messing up.
That sounds like Mittens every time we have this show.
That sounds like our we have a rule on the chat called the future plans rule, where I don't answer questions about future plans for that. So yeah, as I can't pronounce her name because it's some Japanese thing. Mitsukai Kira says, then good is done. Immancy, Jintan's new thing. You heard it here, or you didn't hear it here first. You heard the awkward pause and the I shouldn't talk about that here first.
Yeah, so before we jump into today's stories, we do have some shout-outs real quick. I want to give a shout-out to the guy that pulled this off. We killed a marshal. Marshals are rare. They rarely die. There's about, I think, 10 or 15 that have died. This one belonging to Pen of Smash, of all people, got baited on a free rattlesnake, it looks like, and blown away, which was really awesome. And then I need to give a shout-out. I was going to do this DM, but I feel like this is a great time to do it. Whelp Squad, those that intrepid guys that tried to shoot a Keepstar with like 30 Feroxes and all died, just recently did a string of good kills. They killed a Vendetta belonging to Dot and Balance. For those who don't know, Vendetta is a faction Nyx. They killed it with a whole lot of random things. Then last night, or I say this morning, I don't know which, at 1300 Eve, they did this, where they obliterated a Rorqual mining fleet that had been mining in the same exact spot for I don't know how long. Hold on, that's the wrong link, I think. Yeah, let me find. I'll find it in a minute.
Whelp Squad has been on an absolute tear.
So they killed the Vendetta, then they killed the Nyx, and then they killed the entire Rorqual fleet. I'm trying to get the Rorqual.
10 Rorquals went down. It was, we were looking around on the fireside.
It's been absolutely amazing. So good job to Whelp Squad. But we're going to jump in, and today's top story is actually going to be about the CSM. And we're going to press our fancy button.
It presses my fancy buttons.
All right, and so today's top story, we're going to go around the room, as it were, because it is election time, and our guests need as many votes as humanly possible to get onto the election, as, of course, the state can only provide so many. And so we're gonna take from CCP Guard's AMA. For those that want to see CCP Guard's AMA, he answered a whole bunch of really interesting questions. And we'll go to each of them, and we're going to ask these questions to them, because it's really important. And one of the biggest questions that come out of this incident...
I've got
go ahead, sorry.
Biggest one. Sorry, this is critically important.
Yeah.
So, serious question. So, most important CSM question. Moderator, are you, like, coming to us from a, like, model train store or a shoe store? Or
I thought it was a gun store.
Gun store? Like, what are all these little boxes behind you?
That's where he keeps the bodies.
Oh, come on, Jim. No, it's not guns. It's actually model trains. So let me get out.
Sure, please.
Okay. So you can now see that it's a train. And
that's awesome.
Let me move the webcam real quick.
Oh,
so
dude.
Behind me is just like an entire layout of like a model train railroad.
That is so amazing.
That's fucking awesome. I actually haven't done train stuff since I was a little kid, but I remember subscribing to. Wow, that is a serious setup you got there. That is awesome. That's legit, dude.
That's awesome.
I used to subscribe to Model Railroader and all that other good shit back when I was much younger. That's badass.
Yeah, that is really cool.
Sweet.
Like,
is that your first total train wreck, as it were, of a conversational tangent? But is that your like, how many railroads, how many layouts have you built? Because that looked like it was a pretty significant setup.
Some when I was younger, but this is like the one that I have in, like my actual basement, because it takes up enough real estate as is. So
it's legit.
This is enough.
Okay, so I've got to totally not just go off about that.
No, I enjoy that, because I was trying to figure out if the boxes in the back were either shoe related, because I'm looking like there might be shoe polish up there, a bunch of rags, and then like I'm looking, it looks like a model thing going on, and then maybe boxes of ammo. Someone asked me, so it's awesome. That's really cool.
Alrighty. Well, let's go ahead and go back into CSM stuff. So Boat was about to lead us in before I diverted us into model railroading.
One of the biggest questions, and he didn't really answer this in his section. He kind of answered it, kind of didn't. But I got to ask you guys this: is they're looking at trying to find a way to allow alphas to vote, and the big question here is, should their votes count as much as someone who's a paying customer with an Omega? And this is a very interesting question because you have a situation where skill farms, who may have 100 accounts, who are all technically Omegas, but that's just one guy, right? So his one vote counts as 100 in the current voting system. Is that a good thing? And we'll start with moderator here.
So, I mean, when we were in the process of deciding how we were going to have the upper and lower houses in America, this is one of the things that ended up getting discussed is, do you want to have, like one state have the same voting power as another state, even though one state might have a lot more people living inside of it, right? So you ended up having the compromise where in the Senate, each state gets 2 representatives and they go to the upper house, and then in the lower house, it's all proportionally balanced, and that's how they sorted that. Obviously, it's not super ideal for someone to potentially have 300 plus accounts that are still SP farming and just be able to massively skew election results, but I don't really see a way around it right now.
Yeah, and Jinten, so the same thing is, this brings up a good point, Mr. Moderator, is should an alpha account, should like the alpha candidate, they have one or two candidates for alpha, they're like, out of the whole 10 guys that get elected, maybe 2 are alpha clones. How would this work? Like, this is weird.
You can already be elected as an alpha member. You don't need Omega status to run for the CSM. You could conceivably have your first ever subscription be handed to you directly by CCP if you'd like. You just have to be politically aware and able to manage and interact with the community, and that doesn't require any money whatsoever.
Has anybody actually suggested that, like, has there been a serious suggestion anywhere that alpha accounts should vote? Like, is anybody pushing for alphas to have votes?
We definitely discussed it a bunch on the CSM previous years, and especially whilst we were coming up with them. And we generally were not in favor of it for the obvious fact that you could just account stuff. Like, the only way you'd be able to do it is if you tied it to someone's real-life identity, and I'd be very worried about that happening.
Yeah, that's my feeling here. But Guard points out, he goes, we're one step closer to getting alphas being allowed to vote, and that's a scary thought, considering how you could abuse the shit out of that.
Well, I mean, I guess it's scary if you don't have the organization and the capacity to use it.
I mean, the state's going to be fine. I ain't worried about us.
Imperium would be delighted to allow alpha accounts to vote. We have so many alpha accounts that will be created the moment that they say that they can have a vote, and it will totally not be a vast conspiracy.
So you're saying is we have disenfranchised voters that need to be allowed to have their opportunity to vote?
What you're saying is that we don't need voting ID in Newton's voting booths.
I mean, one of the things about it, like, though, from a serious perspective, not joking about having, let's say that they hypothetically did have a system that worked 100% of the time, that would allow CCP to determine whether an alpha account was a real human being or not. That would still give the Imperium just a tremendous amount of power. Like, even if it was completely legitimate, we would not need to have fake accounts in order to overwhelm any election, because we have a society here. Goonswarm has been in existence in this game since 2005, late 2005, and any player who has ever been part of Goonswarm, and we have their emails, we have a system to reach out to our people, whether they're active or not in the game. We have more legitimate alpha players than anybody else in EVE.
Right. I mean, we could always find a way to, it's almost like the idea of someone who's dead voting, right? Because they haven't played the game in maybe 10 years, and then they've come back to the game all of a sudden just to cast their vote, and then they disappear again. But this is interesting. It's an interesting question because, maybe that gets people more interested in the game. Who knows? But then the next question he had, which is, again, it's a big deal, is the CSM extremely relevant today? is as relevant as it was when it first started, when it was really needed, really important stuff.
I think you have a fundamental misconception of the history of the CSM if you think the CSM was anything near effective for its first 4 terms.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point that Gentana has, which is the CSM was completely ineffective until CSM5, and the CSM became effective because the CSM5 was such a fucking disaster area that they started doing actual damage to the core of the game. And the reason why, like I was talking about this on the far side earlier, you know, the CSM is critically important as a risk mitigation factor. It's too dangerous to be left in the hands of idiots or ignored. You know, they tried to remove jump bridges from the game with CSM5, and they told CCP that they supported the idea of removing jump bridges in the game, and that's why Nullsec took it over, CSM6, my CSM. And never looked back. So you might not necessarily get your pet project in, but the CSM is something that, you know, it's like handing, you know, you wouldn't want to hand a small child a loaded gun. You know, that's the same sort of thing, is you don't let random puppies take over the CSM, or they'll blow off either your leg or their own leg.
Yeah, I will say that is, I definitely do define CSM5 and CSM6 as effectively the growing up period of the CSM. It's where the CSM became an effective tool for bringing player concerns to CCP and getting them actually acted upon. And unfortunately, yeah, it's not even kindness, it's truth. Like, you can look at everything around it. It's obviously true. You can't deny it.
Well, one of the things that we did find in the CSM6 was, you know, I think that the media metagame really sort of kicked off there, because we realized that the CSM was functionally a lobbying group, and that by using the fact that reporters love to talk to the CSM means that you could then leverage that fact to bestow positive coverage on the devs who were doing good things. Like in CSM6, we highlighted and talked up what CCP Veritas was doing a lot, because he was working on implementing tie-dye. In this day and age, people whine about tie-dye, but they don't know how bad it was in the black screen era, where things weren't fair. It was terrible. Tie-dye is one of the best things that's happened to EVE, because it only seems like it sucks if you don't know what it's like to black screen.
Not fair as an understatement, because there were groups that figured out how to work around the black screen. Like if you were in system beforehand, whereas if you weren't, or if you didn't enter that system at all that day, there were so many like workarounds that would just obliterate the game. And there were several big ticket fights that happened because of that. So yeah, I love tie-dye, just the same as I love soft hacking, but that's a very different discussion.
Anyway, let's let moderator answer the question. Can you actually restate the question again? What was it? It was like,
so is the CSM important now? Is it still relevant as it was when they absolutely needed it during like the cloning monocle debate, or monocle gate and all that?
I mean, yeah, of course it's still relevant. I mean, I wouldn't be here otherwise, especially now with the new executive producer coming in, who is going to be either someone promoted up from in the company or someone that they hire externally. That's going to be a huge part of what the CSM does, in addition to their current roles of being communicative to the public and being an effective focus group to filter out ideas and just being the active and engaged base that they need to be for EVE to be functional.
Yeah, and so that leads me to another question. The producer's coming. We don't know who it is, but I've heard rumors that it's going to be CCP Fozzie stepping in as the lead producer. Who here thinks that's a good idea?
Well, where did you hear these rumors? Some random person whisper in a closet somewhere?
I just got it. I got a viable source that said it could be CCP Fozzie. I'm just kind of curious what the stream thinks, maybe with our future CSMs here.
Absolutely no comment whatsoever.
No comment, moderator?
I'm pleading the fifth.
Okay, what do you think, Vinton? Since I mean, you're here. I mean,
I think that the last time I was, before you suggested that there was a rumor that Fozzie would be the executive producer, I was going to comment that moderator suggesting that the new EP would come in during this next CSM term is an interesting idea, because the last time that CCP was without an EP was after CCP Unifex left that position. and he was still with the company and was working in the Atlanta office, CCP Unifex being John Lander. In my opinion, John Lander was one of the most effective executive producers that EVE Online has ever had. He masterminded the fixing of EVE and the aftermath of the Incarnate nonsense. But when he stopped being EP, because he had a term limit, he only wanted to do it, from what I recall, for a certain period of time because it's a burden. They spent like 2 years trying to find an EP. They had external postings to try to hire somebody in from outside. They looked around for internal candidates, and it was vacant for, I think, 2 years before they nominated or officially promoted CCP Seagull. So, let's not assume here that EVE is going to have a new EP tomorrow or anytime soon, because last time they looked around for somebody, it took them years.
There were a lot of vocal fears that it would have been this new EA guy, but McLeod's pointing out the EA guy is gone now. That was a rather quick stay.
It wasn't a quick stay. So we got confirmation of this a couple weeks ago. I think we mentioned it on the Meta Show, but it's relevant here. Sean Decker was the senior VP of product development at EVE, and he was the EA boogeyman for a long time. Yeah. And it turned out that before FanFest, he accepted a position at Wargaming, so he's off to Cyprus. Yeah, we talked about that. Yeah. He was actually, I think, in the corporate hierarchy, he was above the executive producer, because that was essentially a C-level position that he was in. So most of the rumors involving Sean Decker involved succession strategy. So he's off the table. There was no risk of him becoming an EP. Functionally speaking, right now, Hilmar's the EP. And I think that's a good thing. The fact that Hilmar is playing the game, you're starting to see a lot of active engagement in things, because the CEO is actually encountering things like planetary interaction sucks, the PvE sucks, we should fix this, warp stabs suck. Like, here's all the stuff that's happening, and I think it's fantastic. So that's my take on it all. I don't think it's a serious suggestion that Swazi would be the EP, but whatever.
Okay, so the next question is, there was a person that brought this up, and I'm curious to see what everyone here thinks, because I like the idea personally, because I think it's ease of use, is having a button that appears on your in-game bar that allows you to vote from in the game. So it's just, you press a button, it pops up with all the candidates, you vote, done. That simple.
That's something we've talked to CCP a bunch about, but unfortunately for technical reasons it's not possible. They're looking at potentially getting voting in the launcher, however, as the launcher is obviously effectively a Google Chrome page, so it should be possible to do it through there.
I mean, they used to have a browser, right? Couldn't they have just, maybe used their browser that they invested all that time in, the browser?
No, because that browser was a horrible mess of security problems that enabled a lot of bad things TM in the background that I'm not allowed to share.
Oh, interesting. So,
well, I mean, the code in EVE is just a disaster area and always has been. So, doing anything in EVE or altering something about the game that doesn't involve changing the equivalent of database entries is always a nightmare. I mean, if it was a game that was getting coded from the ground up and the CSM was something that would actually develop, require dev cycle, you could get more people voting for it. But, I don't think that if you magically coded, it might not even be worth it. Let's say that CCP did have a voting interface in the game, and they spent how many dev cycles to produce that. How many actual more votes would it get? Probably not that many, because right now, people only go to the polls when they're motivated and organized, which is frankly a tiny percentage of the youth population.
Yeah, I guess it's the idea of opportunity cost. If you're doing this, you're inherently not doing something else.
Exactly, and we would like them to do something like fix FozzieSov instead of. Well, at least that's my take on it.
Make FozzieSov great again. Maybe add it to all structures instead of just
make FozzieSov damage caps again.
I don't know.
Make FozzieSov have kill mails for the first time.
Oh my god, yes, please kill mails.
If it had kill mails, I wouldn't mind it as much. Let's be honest.
It wouldn't be nearly as awful. I mean, that's one of those things that was fundamentally just so broken about it, and still is okay, you went on a FozzieSov op, what do you have to show for it? Nothing. Even when the Dominion Sov ops, when you're just blowing up SVUs, you at least got something for your trouble.
Yeah, so we're going to pop into the next bit, and then this is going to be kind of a take on everything, because Jintan was involved in this recently. And we're going to be moving into Nullsec Power Hour, and I have a fancy new video. Apparently I broke the last one. That or the guys that made it didn't get to work. I don't know, but this is the new one. It finally works, so we're good. Okay, and so right away we're going to talk about Abyssal Depths and Mutaplasmids. It's been out for a couple weeks, and I wanted to see thoughts here from our CSM and of course Mittens on this. Is it good for the game? Because we'll start with moderator on this, because you do Alliance tournament stuff, and I'm seeing some god tier items come out of this. I watched a guy take a very expensive 2 billion-S web, and he detonated it. And then I watched a guy take, I think it was Tuzzy from Goons, took just a basic tier micro warp drive and turned it into something better than an A-type, which is unheard of. How do you think this is going to affect the Alliance tournament?
So the Alliance tournament, it affects things a little bit less because there's set restrictions on what modules you can use. Propulsion modules like you were just talking about, and some of the tackle modules, specifically like scrams and disruptors, you wouldn't use a disruptor in the AT anyway because you're stuck in an arena. But things like scrams, armor reps, shield boosters, plates, extenders, those can all be modified by these unstable mutagens, and those would all be useful in an AT if you want to, min-max your comp.
Yeah, I've actually been taking a look into this myself, and I think there's absolutely potentially room to be starting to use these in doctrines. Like, the price point for the mutagens right now is so much cheaper than faction that if you start taking meta or T2 mods and just mass rolling them for things like speed, it's going to make a lot of ships that have good fitting but relatively poor overall base stats really strong for their cost, because you can start using shitty like abyssal mods that only have bonuses to one stat like speed that you care about, and making those very good, like those hulls, because it gives them access to cheap power.
Yeah, especially now that some of the faction mods themselves are becoming more and more expensive as people are buying them up to roll them. The Tech 2 modules and some of the in between meta modules, if you roll them and you get up to like low tier, mid tier faction, it all of a sudden becomes very worth it.
Yeah, the main thing that's missing right now is a solid way of marketing them and having them in a place where you can buy them concretely. Because I can't right now put in an order of, say, I want 100, plus 5% or better 10 MNABs.
Now, that's a question. Do we know if CCP is planning on improving the market and contract functions for the Abyssal products?
I know the answer to this, and yes. They wanted to look at adding more variety of the way we search. Now, the issue with that is, we shared this almost a month ago now, where we showed the way Path of Exile does it. Path of Exile doesn't even do the market themselves because of how complicated that game is and how there's so many choices. And I can see CCP really struggling with this. Now, they are trying to address it by allowing for more options, but you're talking in some cases, you might have 50 different options in total from all the different things you have to go through. CPU, power grid, cap, rep power. If you want to find one with great rep power, great. You just found one with great rep power, but now you have 1,000 choices of good or bad CPU, good or bad power grid, good or bad cap usage. And there's just so many options. If they don't allow for that, it's impossible to find these unless you make them yourself. Like, that's why Jintan just brought up a point where he says, use them in doctrines. Until they get the contracts and or market system where you can search through these and find good ones, I just don't think it's viable. I don't think there's enough of them.
I think you underestimate the amount of effort that people are willing to put in for EVE Online, because I reckon you just say, okay, I'm going to need you to roll 100 of these mods. I need every single one that has 5% or above in speed in this pot. Everything else, just get rid of. I don't care about it. And that will just happen.
Right.
Well, one of the things that we have to see is what the supply is going to be like, right? Whenever there is a new feature in EVE, there is this period of tremendous excitement about it, right? Like with incursions, oh my god, everybody tried out incursions. The Abyssal sites, the real question is going to be, are there enough people that are still going to be doing these to supply a market that is then liquid enough and has enough information to have that. Like if you had an infinite supply of them and you could actually figure it out, I totally agree with Jintan that people would then say, fit all this stuff with at least a 5% boost from some sort of an abyssal mod.
Well,
but if people like, I'm really curious to see like if we can get some market data to see whether the number of things from abyssal stuff is going to accelerate. Like, are people going to run more, or are people just going to like try it out a couple times, like with the Blood Raider Satias? Let's try it out a couple times and then lose interest.
Here's another reason why I don't think you'll ever see them in Doctrines. Arendis brings up a very good point. Is as of right now, the kill board system does not support seeing if these were good abyssal mods or bad ones. And you could very well have some guy who just rolled his 10MN micro warp drive mutaplasmid to be absolutely dog shit, throws on his Doctrine ship, gets reimbursed like he's using a good one, and then he sells the good one to the market and makes money, right? There's no way to check them right now. So on a Doctrine level, hundreds of these things being used. Let's say you wipe a fleet of 100. How do you reimburse it? How do you handle that? And that's where I think it's a big deal, as Arendis points out, is you can't see if that guy was using a good one or not. There's no way to tell outside of literally watch him micro warp drive in a direction for 10 minutes.
So I actually wrote a blog piece on kind of the effect of these, and where you're going to see them get used a lot more and have a lot more viability is going to be in the smaller scale content like the solo roamers and kind of small game PvPers, and at like mid-level conflicts where you would be able to put an extended point range on something like a Lachesis or a Hugin, where you're not at the scale where you're just going to get instantly alpha'd like you would in a block level engagement.
Right. Yeah, even Janelle, whatever you want to call him, he's one of our fitting team guys. He said there's absolutely zero chance we've ever used these on alliance level because it's impossible to verify the grade of the mod before it's used in a fleet. And that's a really good point. And here's a big deal. You mentioned them getting used in solo roams, and right here we have a Demovic, which is the new frigate, currently being used. And this thing, it's a badass ship. I have one. I spent quite a penny on it. I've trained up the skills. But here we see one with a abyssal afterburner and a good proper fit, but somehow it died to just a basic tier faction Navy Comet. Jintan, how did you lose this?
Basically, I'm just terrible at Even Life.
Because, I mean, how much did you pay for it when you bought it?
Oh, way too much. I was just messing around. Like, I was just trying to get a feel for how the actual rolling system worked.
Yeah.
So I was using, like, I was putting 100 1MN A-type ABs through it, just to see what came out the other side, just experimenting with it. And that's what I got. I was like, all right, so this is a rough equivalent of what I can do, and I just wanted to test and see which ones worked the best. Yeah. Like, I had a little more success with the Morlus Navy issue in that regard.
It's interesting.
It was a fun use of Monopoly.
Yeah, I like your fit, because I bought one of these. I spent, I think, $2 billion on mine.
I did not spend that much. I do not have $2 billion to waste.
I literally bought the thing like the second day it was out, because I wanted one really badly, and it's just sitting there, and I haven't found a fit I liked. I did find a fit that these things can go like 5,400 meters a second, so interceptor speeds, and do like 350 DPS. So I want to use them to fight like interceptors that think they can solo PvP me. But I haven't decided if that's worth $2 billion plus implants and all that. So, but that's an interesting thing. Is the question's been raised in the last few days all over Reddit. I've been trying to keep up with EVE News as much as I can. Are these good for the game overall? I mean, are these going to improve the game or make it worse? And I take that question.
I think as long as they're balanced, they're obviously going to be great for the game, right?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you guys, because we have our sitting CSM member and then moderator.
I'm inclined to say no for two reasons. One, because they introduced power creep that is unnecessary right now. And two, it makes it fundamentally impossible for the developers to actually balance aspects of the game for a couple different reasons. So right now, let's say that CCP decides, you know what, I really, really want to nerf the Gila. We think the Gila's overperforming. It's, above performance statistics. And that could be any ship. So there are a few different ways that they can go about changing that, right? They can drop the power grid in the CPU so you can't fit as much on top of it. They can drop the damage. They can change the agility. But then you can just take these modules that are procedure or randomly generated, and you can just completely circumvent any sort of balancing process that CCP goes through. So then CCP has to either balance for base Tech 2 infection modules, or they have to balance around mutaplasmids that have better fitting, better agility, and that's a significant problem.
See, that's where I'm looking at this. I'm looking at this going, CCP have done this several times with certain key ships, especially the Drake, where they'll nerf just enough CPU that it makes it not viable anymore. But with these new mods, you could scrape CPU out of these mods, and now the ship works again, right? I use the Drake because Drake's horrible right now, and it's in a bad place, and it doesn't work. Please fix the Drake. But things like Zealots or Legions, for example, things that are going to be really tight on CPU on a good fit, just got even more room. You're starting to see mutaplasmids replace entire low slots. So on a thing like a Zealot in the past, you had to fit 3 or 4 faction low slots to get enough CPU on the thing to make it work for the cost. Now, these faction low slots were cheap, but the quantity wasn't there. There wasn't enough of them. Now you can just put on the Afterburner, make it a mutaplasmid, and now you don't need to have all these rare faction low slots. You just have a mutaplasmid that has enough CPU, even if it's shit. And so, yeah, that's where I'm concerned, and this is why this person brings this up on Reddit and says that this is bad for the game in the long run. Maybe not short term, because there's not enough of them right now, but when there's millions of these things, and you can just go grab 100, stack of 100, and really modify a fleet, I think the rich alliances will find a way to abuse this. You know, the people who have the money.
Here's a question for you, though. Do you think all the times when CCP has balanced a ship around a particular fit and then nerfed it so that it can't use that fit anymore, just due to simple fitting concerns, do you think that those fixes have been the ones that have had the most good for the game, or have the best fixes been ones where they address the actual cause of the problem, which is normally the imbalance of a module as opposed to an individual ship?
I think it's ship that really affects the game, because, again, the Drake. The Drake was a ship that cost very, very little, but punched way above its weight.
The Drake was not the problem. The Drake was not the problem. It's that it was the only ship that was capable of using heavy missiles at that time in the meta.
See, I always, I remember, I think it was back when I went to FanFest, Fozzie talking about how he did not like the Drake being able to take on Zealots, right? And maybe Mittens can comment on this, but I remember we would throw hundreds and hundreds of Drakes at a 50-man Zealot fleet.
I think that it's ridiculous to suggest that the reason why the Drake was a problem was heavy missiles. The reason why the Drake was a problem was it's a balance of price for the hull, which means the basket of materials that go into it, the level of EHP it had combined with the missile utility. So like if you just nerfed heavy missiles, it wouldn't have really changed things that much, because one of the things that made the Drake excellent is how fucking tough it was for how cheap it is. Same reason why Feroxes are interesting in this day and age is because they're this balance of dirt cheap, surprisingly tough, and yet effective. Similarly, Ishtars, right? Like sentry drones are bullshit. We did eventually get those nerfed, but the real reason why sentry drones were a problem was one drone trigger that did get fixed finally, but the Ishtar hull was so ridiculously effective, and it still is today. So I think it is. I think that there are sometimes it is a situation where the balance issue is actually one of a module that needs balancing, and sometimes it's an issue of a ship that the ship needs balancing. I don't think it's one thing or the other. Like, oh well, it's always actually the module. You know, sometimes it's the ship, sometimes it's the module.
No, you're just reinforcing my point there, though, because you're saying that the problem was the ship stats, but you didn't talk about fittings. You're talking about intangible factors that are built into the ship design, as opposed to just, oh, you can't fit this module anymore because you don't have enough CPU.
But that's what. No, you have to understand. That's what made the Drake so powerful, was because it had the CPU and the power grid to fit such a beefy tank. Right nowadays, you can't fit that extra shield extender.
No, I'm not arguing that isn't the case. I'm just saying that, like, for the game overall, holistically, as long as CCP keeps that tactive balance, it will be best for the game, because you're going to have things. You're going to have things fixed right. You're going to have things fixed so that there's good interplay, so that you can always leverage, you know, money and the amount of people and the amount of skill and effort you want to put in and get a result, which is good.
Here's the thing that gets me is I think the day they add shield slaves is the day we don't have to worry about if these muted plasmids are balanced or not, because shield slaves are really important. For those that don't know, we have a very large contingent of this game that have been missing out on something that armor ships have, and that's slaves. Armor ships have slaves, shield ships do not. I know it's often left field, but I think our constituents, Zungin and all the other Tibrizzles out there, would really love to see shield slaves, more importantly than these abyssals. Maybe that'll be the next thing they work on.
We should ask Moderator, as Bob says. Moderator, what's your take on Jintan's argument about balance?
Well, I mean, so you can kind of just yes and no. I mean, yes, you want to actually solve the root cause of the problem and not just do a band-aid fix. But what I'm saying is that, let's say you drop the agility on, say, a ship, or you drop the base speed and you drop the fitting, because there's a number of different variables that you can use to do that, but you can kind of bypass the whole point of it. And even though, yes, they might be expensive, yes, they might not be super effective in fleets, I don't think we're ever going to get to a point where an entire 100-man plus fleet can fit a 5% module. I don't see that as, in at least the short term. Maybe 5 years from now we can have that conversation, but not right now. The problem that I have is that you end up with things like the Lachesis and the Hugin, and especially in small game, it begins to really break things, because you have to balance around, as a player, what do I do if I come up against something? When every ship can kind of become a Spiteful, because you can just fit on everything that you would ever want to it with Abyssal mods, even if they are expensive. If you have the money, you can do that. And that gets to the whole kind of misquotation about cost being a balancing factor or not.
Right, and that's where so we'll use an example of a group that does this for their size very well, and that's the mutant fleet that is run by Black Legion. You'll see one or two Hugins, Elo himself, and a Lachesis, and the thing that makes the mutant fleet killable is they have to get close enough to point you and web you in order to be able to apply their damage without you just warping off, right? So they have to be close enough to hold you there in order to hit you. Otherwise, you just line out and warp away when you get primaried, and then you never die. And so if you increase that range with these new mods, where you're webbing out to 100k instead of 80k and pointing to 100k instead of 80k, that fleet just backed up 20 kilometers, and they're a lot harder to kill now. And I think that's where you'll see a big thing is 50, 60-man fleets, the little guys. Sub-only mode.
Yep, we are in sub-only mode. We do this for the last 15 minutes of the show. So yeah, usually if people have Q&As that they want to ask and they're subscribers, we will try to ask our guests those as well. One of the things that I think is curious about the aftermath of all of this Abyssal stuff ties into what we were talking about earlier with the executive producer question. There, from the CSM minutes that were released from the previous summit, we know that there has been a focus on daily active users, and the whole loot box Abyssal expansion itself was something that we theorize was spearheaded by Sean Decker, who is also known as, I think, CCP Hellbunny. And so here is this expansion that has basically been put in and pushed by a guy who, as of April, up and left to go to wargaming. So now we've got this sort of really weird game balance and political situation where, like Moderator is saying, I remember back in the battle days where you ended up with like a stabbed out vagabond that had snakes, and there was literally no way to catch them, right? Here's a vagabond that's going 10,000 MS and has stabs and just can kill with complete impunity. And I think that there is a risk of seeing that in the equivalent, the modern equivalent of that in LoSec and in any other places where you can have like one man alone against the horde with his 15 billion-isk blinged out abyssal ship. And it's going to be really curious to see what happens from a balance perspective, because it is so complicated to balance, because these things can affect so many different things.
And that's another thing. And to add to that is these new ships, right? These new ships come into the game with a new mechanic that's never existed, and that is they put their laser beam on a target, and as long as you're shooting the same target and they stay in range, the target will eventually take more and more damage over time, up to 150%. So instead of having 500 DPS, you might have 1500 by the time it's done. Like it just amplifies the damage. Or maybe
a couple of questions here.
Yep.
So Giddy says, do we think that we'll see Trafalgar ship doctrines in the midterm?
I say yes.
I don't think so.
Ooh. Okay, I say yes, and here's why. I see the rich goon multi-boxer already theorizing, how do I use 10 of these in an Ishtar fleet that, say Asher does, or 10 of these in a mega fleet? Because here's how I see someone using this. Yeah, 750, sorry. Is that, say you've got 10 or 20 of these in a 200-man fleet. You tell all those 20 guys to shoot Logi. One Logi, constantly applying a shitload of DPS on that Logi. That Logi is either going to have to get all the reps from his friends, or they're going to have to focus on repping the primary that's getting shot by the main fleet. These ships provide enough damage now. In the battleship form, I think it's 1,300 base damage. That really could adjust or change the way people have to deal with fleet fights. And
how are you going to get a battleship to ever stay in range of any logistics?
Well, in this case, I think these things can hit to 80k. These new battleships, doing let's say 800 DPS. You have a situation where, like it's saying, an Ishtar fleet, the cruiser version goes 2k a second, and has some, I think, 30-40k range, so it can get on top of things really easily and just sit there. I just see it as a chance where it could really bust the game in how you deal with them.
At the very least, I think it's safe to say that we'll see the trig battleships used for small-scale structure bashing. It's just a really useful way to have a anti-structure doctrine. It's not a full-blown fleet doctrine, but it's something that I think you could see at an alliance scale of, okay, guys, we just need to go clean up this region, they're just really useful for fire and forget reinforcement.
Yeah, if you got someone you're evicting, moderator, maybe you can comment on this, is like, say you got someone who just left, they got a whole bunch of structures, just spread them out. Go AFK. Like, these work better than pulse lasers, and you just fire and forget. Like, you can break DPS caps real easily, and I don't know, what do you think about them? I mean, do you think we'll see these in the Alliance tournament? These really beautiful ships, because I like them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. See them in the AT. They're very powerful for their point cost because they're considered the Tech 1 ships. They're not considered faction Tech 2. So for their point cost for what they give out, especially in the utility slots, they're going to be a must-have for most tournament teams.
I didn't even think of that, because they count them as T1. You can have one of each, so you could technically have the frigate and the cruiser probably, or even the cruiser battleship. And the damage on these things is amazing. But like I said, the constant fire, that's something they've never had in the game. They've never had a weapon that constantly applies damage per tick, rather than boom, 10 seconds later, boom, 10 seconds later, boom, like you have with artillery, or even pulse lasers is every 4 seconds. These things fire at a constant tick, boom, 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 and they just apply damage repeatedly. It's going to be interesting to see. True DPS, as I like to think.
Well, we have another question here from Impanat.
Yeah.
Which is, so do you guys know if the intention to change supers, super ratting is still on the table, and what do we think about it? So I haven't actually heard whether people were trying to get rid of super ratting or altering it.
I could comment on this. So the big look at by CCP is changing the way they pay out per ship class. So a super carrier kills a battleship that's worth 5 million. That battleship's going to pay out a super carrier $1 million ISK. It's going to pay a cruiser the full 5 million. So adjusting the payouts per class, so you get less of a payout if you're in a super carrier or carrier, and that's one of the ways they're looking at balancing it without nerfing the ships themselves. And I'm curious, Jintan, is this something you've heard? Because I heard this from a post by CCP, and I'm curious what you think. Without breaking
I know it's an idea that's been discussed. That's about it. I haven't heard any. Well, if I'd heard any concrete plans, I wouldn't be able to talk about them, obviously, which is unfortunately the downside to being on the CSM, is that you don't get to talk about the concrete plans that were laid that then didn't happen because of things that you've said. You don't see a lot of what the CSM doesn't get to talk about, unfortunately, which is, as I'm sure the Matani can back me up on, sometimes very frustrating when you're talking to the public.
Moderator, what do you think? Do you think that's a good idea to change based on ship class rather than trying to adjust the balance of the ships to meet the ratting?
I think it becomes very problematic when in the sandbox you end up changing PvP damage to reflect PvE. We remember when they changed the damage output on fighters and the complete and utter shitstorm we saw with that. So this would be one way they could possibly address that. I would have to really look at what the actual concrete changes were before I could say anything, one way or another about it. But
yeah, I don't know. I think it's a good idea. I do like the idea. I mean, Jay Mazes wants to point out right away that if they do step in and try to find a way to nerf super carrier routing, that you're going to see a drastic plummet in Plex purchasing, which will affect the game as a whole. And I do agree with that, because right now, making money in the game is one of three ways. You can produce shit, i.e. you make something out of the materials that someone else gives you. You can rat or mine and to get the basic materials that way, or you can market speculate. And unless you're in Goons, market speculation is kind of out of your realm. As a lowly line member, say, in Pandemic Horde, right? You're not going to have the knowledge and the wonderfulness that GSS offers to make those good plays, as it were. But you can mine and you can rat. But then if they go and change that just really, I think, affects the game more and more. Because they've already drastically lowered your ability to rat the super carrier. I mean, it went from being able to go there AFK to now you have to play like you're a damn StarCraft 2 player. I don't even do it. It's impossible. It's so hard. And I get made fun of for how bad I am at it. I don't know, Mittens, have you ever tried ratting with your super carry? I think it was a Wyvern one.
I have, yeah. Actually, we did it on stream, and that's when I got to kill Bjorn Beam and his Velder. But, I don't know. I don't think that the current issue in EVE is that people are ratting too much in super carriers. Like, one of the things from a business perspective, you want to incentivize people to get into your end game vessels, right? Because it takes time, it takes investment. It means that your customers are continuing to play the game. They're continuing to engage with the product. So having it a thing where it's like, okay, well, you don't want to even bother going for the end game ship because you can only use it in certain circumstances, and it doesn't really make you all that much money from a PvE perspective. I think it would just be a bad business decision. From an Imperium and Delve perspective, it doesn't really matter. We have people who make money from ratting with super carriers, but the real money is usually in mass and organized Rorqual mining, so what the fuck ever. But I think from a business perspective, the sort of customer lifecycle for an EVE player is CCP wants to incentivize you to go up the chain. They want you to desire to find a niche or aim for bigger and better ships, and making the ships broken at certain aspects of the game sort of pointlessly would be silly. It's not like right now the game is like, oh my god, everything is a balance because super carriers are ratting so much. It's not even a blip on the radar.
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be an interesting thing because when you look at the monthly economic reports, the things that drive that economic report in the discussion is how much ore has been sucked out of the game and how much ratting's been done. Because without the ore, you don't produce ships, and without producing ships, you don't have big fights going on. And I think Rorquals bring a balance to the cost, right? Without mass Rorqual mining, things are not cheap enough in the current game to really use them in a viable way. It just becomes more and more expensive. And that's the problem with certain ships in this game, is that their price limits their viability on a large scale. Right.
I think Tuzzy has a really good point, which is that ratting supercarriers are great for the game. It gives people something to hunt, right? You want supercarriers and other valuable end-game ships out there in belts being at risk because, let's say that they took it away. Let's say that they made it not worth your while to rat in a supercarrier. Then all of those ships out there that are then targets for people to hunt, they just stay docked up and are only used for PvP, which is what it used to be like back in the day before you could really rat at them effectively.
Where I would like to see this and take Jay's balance pass idea to a new level is if they do bring in this tiered ratting equivalent where a T1 cruiser is going to make just as much as a super carrier doing the same amount of work, that they should buff the super carrier then, right? Make it do more damage, make it more viable, make it more something, right? They got to put a balance in there of, if you're going to make it suck at PvE, you better make it good at PvP, because otherwise no one will ever use the damn thing, right? Right now, the only time I ever use my super carrier is to go randomly camp a gate with a shield fit and hope I die someday, and I still haven't died yet. Please kill me, God. Because there's no other use for it, right? At least how I use it. But maybe shoot structures, but I just don't see it being viable otherwise. And if they take away its PvE, you're going to see less and less of them, and that's something to kill. I mean, it leads to a lot of struggles. If you look at what happened to GOTG in the North, we caught a Hell. Now that Hell turned out to be a Goon spy who was eventually going to join Goons, but that's beyond the point. Is that we caught him. He called for help. Help arrived. They save him, and they lose another hell and a couple other things in the process. And you don't have that if you're not catching them somewhere. And outside of fleets, that's the only place to catch them is ratting or gating. Super Machine Structures is shit at the moment because of damage cap. There's no reason to even bring a super to just make it quicker. Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know. In the next 3 months, which is probably the worst time for CCP right now because they're on vacation soon. They're just on break, I think, during the summer. If I remember right, CCP has their big vacations now before the Alliance Tournament and other things come up. This is a horrible time for the game to be at a pivotal point for balance. Right? We're at a pivotal point with this new Abyssal stuff to where the game balance in the next 3 or 4 months could drastically change without CCP even touching it. And without CCP really around to pay attention to touch it. So I'll be interested to see what happens come August or September on the Meta Show, what we're talking about then.
I think it's really, yeah, like July and August is like prime CCP vacation time. I think there's still some people currently at the office, but I mean, I would be more concerned if I thought that the Abyssal stuff was going to impact an nullsec. I think that Moderator is correct that most of the imbalance we're going to see is going to be in the smaller scale areas of the game. So, you know, I don't think that the Abyssal stuff is going to make a big impact in any of the sort of conquest-oriented gameplay. From a certain perspective, like things might get horrifically imbalanced in the non-nullsec part of the game. You know, nullsec is kind of it's doing all right now, I guess.
Yeah, to use a BattleTech reference, yeah, you might see a lance that's really broken and overpowered, but the whole planet's not going to get conquered by one lance. So,
yes,
that's a great way. Sorry, I was playing that game a lot recently. And,
BattleTech is awesome.
Yeah,
Good
one last thing I have to show here, and I want to get your opinion on this. And this is an image that just came out of G7, the summit, and it's a great image. And I want to use this image to my vision of the CSM come CSM 13. And I like to think of, in this image, I linked it in chat here, as Aerith, as Trump just sitting there, and everyone shouting at Aerith, going, please, we need to come to consensus here. And Eric's just going, nope, we're doing it this way.
I can't believe that you managed to bring politics into this.
I mean, we bring politics. Look at the image, though.
I did look at the image, and it disgusts me.
I mean,
I can tell you for a fact that Aerith is nothing like Trump.
No, he's not. But the way Aerith, I've known Aerith a while now, and the way he talks is, I tend to be right. I'm usually 100% right, and what I say usually ends up being the correct way to go about it. And money talks in his case. He has lots of EVE money, and we tend to take his advice on EVE money talks very, very seriously. And so I could just when I saw this picture, it got linked to me a little bit ago, and someone said, you know, imagine Aerith as Trump in this picture. I mean, I thought it was just a hilarious a play on pictures, but you know, that's just me, I guess.
He's more the Vince McMahon.
No, I mean, I'm not. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter who's in the picture. Right. Okay,
I'm just gonna act like this didn't happen, and we're gonna move on from there. It's actually we're out of time, so
yeah, I know we're out of time. That's why that's the perfect time to do it.
We have a no politics rule in Elysium for a reason. I've made no secret about where I stand on anything Trump related.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to be a political thing. I was just trying to make a humor joke. But yeah, all right, well, thanks, guys. We're out of time. That's it. Thanks to our guests, and of course, Mittens.
Vote for the CSM, guys.
Yeah, vote CSM
because you only have a day for it because it's a very short election cycle. And yeah, we'll be back next week. And thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
You are about to receive messages that may be harmful to your mental state. Your sense of reality will be questioned. Your view on things will be altered. You are now part of the meta. The meta controls everything. The meta determines what will and will not happen. You are watching The Meta Show.